In our time, when describing the US military power, most people immediately think of them. Enormous aircraft carriers moving entire aerial armies have long been heroes of movies and news reports. But these familiar shapes, sizes, and power didn't appear overnight, and in their time became a true revolution in the Navy. And this revolution has a name. Today on the horizon is the father of American supercarriers, the USS Forrestal. World War II was an era of triumph for aircraft carriers, which conquered the sea and put an end to the previous kings, the battleships. But with the end of the war, the US Navy, their primary operator, faced the question, what's next? In peacetime, this armada was too expensive, and in a potential confrontation with the USSR, a land power, sea-bound carrier-based aircraft were practically useless. This contrasted sharply with the increasingly powerful Air Force, which had acquired strategic bombers and effectively became the sole owner of nuclear weapons. Many believed that they would play a key role in future wars, and therefore attention and budgets were directed there. The Navy, meanwhile, was left to simply cut costs and scrap the ships. Of the more than 100 post-war aircraft carriers, by the end of the 1940s, only about 20 remained. Another fundamental problem for the Navy was the aviation revolution that led to the advent of jet aircraft. These machines were more powerful and faster than the older piston planes, but they were also far more demanding on airfields, especially runway length. Most aircraft carriers simply couldn't handle them. It was immediately clear to sailors that a new aircraft carrier was needed to meet these new conditions, and its development was initiated as early as 1946. Thus was born Project CVA-58, which became known as the aircraft carrier USS United States. And it was ambitious. The ship was designed to carry a large air wing of jet aircraft of various types, making it enormous. 332 meters in length and 80,000 tons of displacement immediately placed it in a new class called supercarriers. And size alone wasn't enough. The ship was a concentration of cutting-edge technologies and engineering solutions, such as catapults and a dynamic superstructure that retracted during active flights, freeing up the deck. But the revolutionary project faced numerous problems, both financial and political. Many, including the US leadership, saw little need for such a complex and expensive ship. The Navy was unable to protect its brainchild, and the project was cancelled. The USS United States was never built. Many had already begun to think that the era of aircraft carriers was becoming a thing of the past, but the outbreak of the Korean War in the 1950s forced them to reconsider. Reality revealed the limited capabilities of strategic aviation in local wars, and the majority of air support was still provided by aircraft carriers, which once again proved their effectiveness. The Navy returned to its ambitious idea, launching a new project. In 1951, the Newport News shipyard in Virginia received an official order to build the lead aircraft carrier, designated CVA-59, and named after the first US Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal. Thus, the USS Forrestal was born. Developing the ship itself was a complex undertaking. Forrestal's designers drew inspiration from the USS United States, but limited their ambitions to make sure that the new design didn't follow in the footsteps of its predecessor. They needed to make the ship smaller while still maintaining the ability to carry a large jet wing. This task forced them to apply a major innovation, an angled flight deck. Given the increased landing distance for jet aircraft, the second runway significantly simplified operations and allowed for parallel takeoffs and landings without the risk of aircraft colliding. Progress itself also helped. Atomic bombs were becoming smaller and no longer required the use of huge bombers, which somewhat lowered the bar for their requirements and allowed to make the deck a bit smaller. They also played around with elevators. Originally, they were supposed to be located on the sides and stern, but with the addition of the angled deck, only one remained on the port side and 3 others were placed on the starboard side, 1 in front of the superstructure and 2 behind it. The island's superstructure itself was kept stationary. All those retractable mechanisms were too controversial. At the same time, it was made narrow and tall. This both saved deck space and, thanks to its height, increased the effectiveness of the radar and communication systems. Furthermore, the funnel located nearby efficiently removed exhaust gases from the power plant. Smoke was a significant problem on older ships. The stumbling block was the catapults. Jet aircraft are heavier than piston-engined aircraft. They accelerate more slowly and have higher takeoff speeds, making the use of booster catapults essential. But the technology itself was still in its infancy, and designers struggled for a long time to decide which option was more promising: hydraulic, steam, or even powder. Ultimately, after much debate, they chose the steam option. As subsequent decades have shown, it was the right choice. 4 such catapults were positioned on the deck. Also, retractable shields were installed behind each launch pad, protecting the deck from jet blasts from the aircraft taking off. Innovations were everywhere. The landing instruments, the power plant, the hangar. Given the rapid pace of aviation development, engineers had to practically guess at the hangar's size requirements. They decided to make it as spacious and tall as possible, based on the dimensions of the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, a fairly large machine. And here's the funniest part of the story. The Navy was in such a rush to get its supercarrier that it began construction in 1952, even before the design was complete. Yes, when Forrestal was laid down, she had no angled deck. The superstructure was initially designed to be retractable, and the catapults were hydraulic. So engineers had to implement many of the listed innovations on the ship that was already under construction, reworking existing structures on the fly. And this despite the fact that, I emphasize, many of these innovations had never been used on ships before. And even with all these adventures, Forrestal was built very quickly. She was launched in 1954, and by the end of 1955 already entered service, just 3 years after her keel was laid. The same happened with her sister ships. USS Saratoga was launched in 1955, USS Ranger in 1956, and USS Independance in 1958. It's hard to even imagine such speed today. And the class's lead ship, Forrestal, was a true star during its early years. A giant 325 meters in length, with a displacement approaching 82,000 tons, and carrying a crew of over 5,500, she was a veritable floating city and airfield, one beside which any other aircraft carrier seemed tiny. And the trials revealed excellent performance. A 260,000 horsepower power plant, combined with excellent seakeeping, enabled this behemoth to reach speeds of 33 knots, a level of the fast aircraft carriers of an earlier generation, despite the latter being significantly smaller and lighter. Its air wing was a fitting match, comprising more than 80 planes and helicopters. Listing them all would take quite some time. It's hard to think of what didn't fly from this deck. From the light A-4 attack aircraft to heavy fighters and bombers like the F-14 and A-5. Not to mention various exotics. Once, as an experiment, even a C-130 landed here. The experiment was a success, though the practice of course went no further. The aircraft was simply too huge, even for a supercarrier. Such an air wing on deck vastly increased the ship's combat potential. The aircraft complement became not only far more powerful, but also more versatile. The aircraft could now strike targets deep within enemy territory, well beyond the coastline. And yes, they were capable of carrying nuclear weapons. The fleet's objective was achieved. This was reflected in the ship's designation as well. Originally, Forrestal bore the index CVA-59, meaning an attack aircraft carrier, but was later redesignated simply CV-59, in recognition of its multi-role capabilities. Although her trials were completed quite rapidly, for the first couple of years Forrestal did not venture far from home, serving primarily as a training ground for naval pilots mastering operations, involving both new planes and new aircraft carriers. Finally, in early 1957, the ship began undertaking long-range missions, primarily in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, where she actively participated in military exercises and demonstration cruises. For Washington, it would be a sin not to show off such a magnificent toy. There were also large-scale operations, some of which are remembered for rather grim events. In 1967, the ship arrived off the coast of Vietnam, where it was tasked with providing air support to ground forces. However, all plans were thrown into disarray. Due to a technical malfunction, an F-4 Phantom parked on the flight deck accidentally fired a missile at an A-4 Skyhawk standing in front of it, triggering an explosion and a horrifying fire that resulted in significant casualties and extensive damage. Actually, to fully grasp just how dangerous this situation was, one must bear in mind that an aircraft carrier is essentially a massive repository of fuel and ammunition. Forrestal specifically carried 7,800 tons of fuel for its own propulsion, approximately 3,000 tons of jet fuel for its air wing, and 2,000 tons of ordnance. Had the fire reached this vast stockpile, the outcome could have been an explosion nearly comparable to a nuclear blast. Yet, with immense effort, the crew managed to rein in the fiery hell and save the ship, which then returned home for repairs and modernization. By the way, Forrestal underwent numerous modernizations throughout her entire service life. This involved both onboard equipment and adaptation to accommodate new aircraft and weaponry. In fact, Forrestal's armament was long considered her least innovative feature: 8 .38 caliber Mark 12 guns, old artillery. Over time, these were removed and replaced with more modern systems, such as the Sea Sparrow missile launchers and, of course, the Phalanx close-in weapon system. A ship without them is hardly a ship at all. In 1990, it underwent another modernization, and its air wing was replaced, its core now consisting of the FA-18 Hornet. However, these results were never put to the test in combat. The aircraft did not participate in Operation Desert Storm. It was outdated and plagued with issues. Indeed, the revolutionary nature of the first supercarrier came at a price. Many of its cutting-edge innovations felt incomplete, and its structural designs were suboptimal. For instance, the portside elevator was rarely used because it interfered with flight operations, while the propulsion system was problematic, limiting the ship's capabilities. Even the fire of 1967, though the scariest, was not the only one. Forrestal was even jokingly nicknamed Zippo and Forest Fire. Such problems plagued her entire class, leading to the rapid curtailment of its production. Of the 10 planned ships, only 4 were built, after which the new and improved Kitty Hawk class was created. Shortly thereafter, the next revolution entered service: USS Enterprise, the world's first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. In 1993, the decision was made to decommission Forrestal, bringing her 37 years of service to a close. The military had many ideas regarding her future: convert her into a museum or sink to create an artificial reef. But she was denied a graceful finale. In 2015, the ship was scrapped. Ultimately, the same fate befell her sister ships. The Forrestal-class aircraft carriers were the world's first true supercarriers and served throughout the greater part of the Cold War. They stood as a symbol of progress and power, as well as the very root from which all subsequent American aircraft carriers grew. The Kitty Hawk, Enterprise, Nimitz, and Ford being their direct successors. Thus, it can be said that the ship served its fleet well and earned its rightful place in history. By the way, our channel also has videos about its successor, Ford, as well as its other colleagues from various countries. Check them out and subscribe to the channel. There are still a lot of interesting things on the horizon.